Hi, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Veteran Voices in Code Service to Software. I'm your host, Greg Drobny, Recruitment Manager for Code Platoon, full stack software engineering program specifically for the veteran and veteran community. I am joined today by Lindsay Swoboda. Lindsay, thank you for joining me first before I say anything.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm so glad that Amanda Huffman introduced us. It is a small community. I'm sure we'll get to that, but I'm delighted to be here and serve your audience in whatever way I can.
Thank you so much. And of note, Amanda's episode is so far our most popular episode. That was the last episode. So you have a tall order to overcome, of course.
I'm ready.
Already. So usually I start this program by asking people a very specific question. However, you fit into a first-time category. Everyone who has been on the show so far has been a veteran of the U.S. military. You are a spouse of a military veteran and have not served yourself. So I'm going to hit you with a different question to start out with, and then we're going to go from there because Lindsay has actually written a book on this subject, and that's kind of what we're going to talk about today. But the normal version, the normal question I start out with is, what made you raise your right hand and serve? I want to ask you a little bit of a twist on that question, which is,
Okay.
did you know what you were getting into when you married a U.S. Marine?
0%. Um, First of all, I think that is, I mean, that's a great question that a lot of spouses hear, right? We hear the like, well, you knew what you signed up for. And it's such a laughable statement because no one knows what they were signing up for, the veteran or the spouse or the family that ends up trailing after them. I actually, and this is, we'll talk about the book in a minute, but I broke up with my husband, Ryan, because we weren't married yet. Let's caveat that. We were dating and I did not want to become a military spouse. I had, my own plans in mind. And when he went into service and I went into university, we tried to make it work for a year. And it was a year of another long distance and never seeing each other. And I was like, I don't know. I don't know if what we had at 19 is really real. Um, and sometimes I feel it's like scary to share that fact, but I think it made us all the stronger because we both had 2 years apart. We dated different people. We grew up a little bit. And as much as, 22-year-olds getting married after that can grow up, but it was a good moment in time for both of us to realize, like, is what we want each other? Like no matter what happens, are we going to continue to set our sights on one another and our goals of becoming a family? And can those dreams that we have of serving in the military and the dreams that I had, can they run their own race alongside one another? So I hope that's a good answer to that. It wasn't a life I expected to live, and yet it has been a wonderful, challenging adventure.
Indeed. Well, that's a great answer, but it also prompts an honest follow-up, which is obviously you had some moments of caution, trepidation, if you will, of saying, "Ooh, I'm not sure this is what I want." Now, having married a U.S. Marine, the challenges you did face, were they what you thought they would be, or were they different? Were the actual things that you were worried about, did that come to fruition, or did the challenges that presented themselves, were they just out of the blue and what you didn't expect?
I think the challenges that I expected to be the most difficult was the leaving, the deployments. My husband was in three combat deployment zones, and those were very challenging. However, we were very young when those were happening, and two of those, one of them we were dating and getting back together. The second one, same story. The third one, we were married. And during that time, of course, we did the like elope. And then he deployed 5 days later for his third mission to Iraq. And then I went on a Carnival cruise ship. So, and was a dancer for Carnival. So during that 9 months, I think the challenge was okay, we're married. We made this big decision. There's very few Americans that worked below deck with me, so it was hard to find like relatability,
Yeah.
even though my castmates were lovely. It just was like two parallel universes that we were living in. And and then I think even though deployments are hard, what I found to be harder, because he did more after that,
Mhm.
was reintegration every time. I
Yeah.
mean, I expected like friction in our marriage to be like slammed doors and yelling. And
Mm.
honestly, the scariest thing that happened to us was apathy. Was kind of like
Yes.
you're running your thing over here. I've learned how to exist and thrive without you being here, and without expecting a lot of extra help from you. Support is different. Um, than the help, but that was the harder conflict for us, was like you're back and I don't really know how to welcome you back.
Mm. Yeah.
And I'm almost not leaving space for you. And I fully, take that on and embrace that and try to speak about that vulnerably and honestly for other spouses to say, if you're hearing silence, silence can almost be more harmful than
Yelling
the
and
hard
screaming and
conversations that need to happen. Yeah.
yeah. No, I think you're spot on there, and that ties in with the theory I've had for many, many years, which is that a lot of combat veterans, and I can say this for myself, having a tour in Iraq, you come home and it's not simply, there was a car backfired, and so you're worried it's gunfire. That was never an issue for me.
Yeah.
What was an issue for me was that the life in a combat zone is actually very simple and straightforward, and you come back to this massive complexity of, like you said, you've got different lives going. You have a career, he has a career, he's doing this, you're doing that, and there's this overwhelming amount of complexity, and you start to get apathetic about all of it, and you get a little bit jaded and calloused. What did you see as a way of navigating that worked, or maybe that didn't, or both?
Sure. I mean, I will sing her praises all day long, but one of my mentors is Corey Weathers, who runs the Life Giver podcast. Her and her husband, Matt, have been very vocal about reintegration topics, about couples, marriages, how to strengthen your relationships. And I actually found her podcast when Ryan came back in 2016. We had just had a child, and that was a huge situation as well. You're not expecting to have a child. And for me, I leaned more into my motherhood role than I did into my spouse role because I found out I was pregnant 5 days after he had already deployed. He was like
Oh,
the last to know.
oh.
um, and then when he came back, I was 36 weeks. So luckily, he got to be home for the birth. And then um, when she turned 4 months old, our daughter, he had to deploy again. So in that first year of all the firsts of having a child, I was rocking the solo parenting. And I
Ah,
don't even really like that term because was he always there for me as much as he could be? Yes, but I was like
sure.
fully immersed in this role and wasn't even really thinking about what it was like for him to not be doing all of these firsts, like for better
Sure.
or for worse, right, with a
Sure.
child. So that year, I typed in like military marriage help into Google. In 2016, and Corey Weathers' podcast is what popped up.
Okay.
And I started listening to it on walks with my daughter, like in the evenings. And Corey released a book years ago called Sacred Spaces, and I read that, and it gave me a lot of language in order to use with Ryan, my husband, and we started to have the conversations you don't want to have but are necessary.
Sure.
And right around that time, we got orders to do. He did Marine Corps Security Group, which is our Marines that serve at embassies overseas, and we got stationed in Morocco.
Okay.
And wow, talk about things you're not expecting to be hard. I had worked for Carnival. I had danced overseas in lots of different locations. We'd been stationed in Korea. We had done a huge overseas trajectory that I was like, Morocco, I've got this. Um, and yet, when we got there, I feel like I had a really hard time adjusting. He went right into mission mode. I mean, the tempo there was very hot for him.
Hmm.
And it was almost like we were deployed, but together as a family, right? Like you're there, but you're not
But
seeing your
no.
person.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I feel like during that time too, we were having harder conversations. And yet I was also having to confront within myself, how do I cope because he needs to go do his job and not come home to me like not being okay every day.
Mm,
And it was at
right.
that point that I sought counseling, and I started going to counseling myself. And that was a huge lifeline thrown to me to start understanding, it's not just the service member that goes through stress and anxiety and like
Absolutely.
whiplash change. It's also the family. And at that point in time, I feel like I was receiving the message to like change my socks and take the ibuprofen, right? Like,
Right.
just suck it up and keep
Yeah.
going. And I think that's an answer until it's not,
Yeah.
until you've buried so much that you're not being able to function in the way that you can healthily.
Absolutely.
So
Do you
yeah,
feel,
those
no, just a quick question on that. Do you feel, and there's a lot of things the military does well, and there's some things they don't. Do you feel that those resources were readily available for you, or that you felt the need to reach out beyond the military to, whether it was counseling or these resources you're talking about with podcasts, do you think that the military was there to provide those, or was that something you had to go well beyond that for?
at that point, I think I had to go well beyond that. I think that this was back in the before 2020, right? So I think we've done better. I feel like there are more
Mhm.
available out there. I also heard a conversation just this past year up at Fort Cavazos. I went to Millspouse Fest and they had a military health panel, like a mental health panel, and they were discussing the difference between like mental illness and mental wellness. And I feel like there are a lot of ways that we're kind of sometimes afraid to look at mental illness or like something's wrong with us. And I think we've done a good job combating those things, like being like, hey, you need to get in there and try to help yourself. However, there's other conversations about mental wellness, about just things you could be doing that
Sure.
are good for you. Like, hi, let's check our drinking. Let's think about our
Right.
physical activity.
Yeah.
Let's think about our rest that we're getting. And these aren't just like self-care, like fluffy, oh, let's go to the spa. Great, if that's your thing. These are really like um, very tangible efforts we can be making on a daily
Mm.
basis to build awareness about what we need to function, and not just function to get through, but function to be our whole self showing up in our whole life. And that is what I had to learn over time as a spouse, that like nobody else was going to do that work for me. The resources are there. You have to call,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And I do think it is hard, depending on where you're stationed, to get access to said resources.
Mhm.
So if you can't get into some place right away, you've got to keep trying, right? If one thing doesn't work, if one connection with a counselor doesn't work and that falls flat, you've got to be brave enough and like have enough courage to try again and keep advocating for yourself. And I know that's hard when you're low
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
already.
Yeah.
Yeah, or you don't feel like you have the time, right? You've got
Right.
so many kids under two and life
Right.
looks a lot different, or
Right.
you're caring for someone and you are the main caretaker. It just are one of my least favorite things. And I don't want to get too off topic, but I really don't like it when people say like everybody has the same 24 hours in a day. I do not think that's true, especially for the military community. um, Depending on your network and the support you have, your 24 hours may look very harrowing compared to
Yes.
others. and
Yes.
and how do we not judge ourselves, or hold ourselves up against others? How do we look at our own paper,
Right.
and see what can I do here?
Well, what you said a moment ago is perfectly applicable to what you're saying here, which is that there are a number of things we can do for mental health, mental well-being, our physical well-being that tie into, without getting too esoteric, the natural rhythms of the world, right? Whether
Mm-hmm.
that's sunrise and sunset and the amount of sunlight we get and the amount of time that we spend outside breathing that air. And the US military does a fantastic job of upending that schedule, right?
Certainly.
Circadian rhythms, whether it's, getting amount of sunlight, any number of things are upended by the military schedule. And so, like exactly what you said, you can say all you want that you have the same 24 hours. They're not. If you have a schedule that has been thrown off. On that note, though, and you said something interesting about reaching out for help. When you saw in your circle, when you saw other spouses, and I'm sure that you did, saw other spouses struggling, was there a common theme that you saw that said there's this recurring theme in people who struggle versus people who struggle less? I don't think it's a matter of not struggling at all. Everybody has their struggles. Did you see a continued, like a common theme among people who struggled more?
I don't know if I can see a common theme in those that struggle more. I think there is a difference in not advocating and not being aware
Mm,
that you can change something.
mm,
Those that I saw struggling a little bit more, I feel like had gotten caught in a cycle of I can't do anything to change this.
sure.
And I think that that is hard to get out of, right? It's a stuck place. And I think that at times there's so many moments where I felt like I was living in like liminal space, which is like the space between,
Hmm.
right? I'm here. We moved every 2 years for 14, and not small moves. Five of our moves were Oconus moves, which are
Hmm.
like, okay, we are going from continent to continent.
Right.
Um,
That's
and
a
there's
big
very
shift.
little, yeah, very little consistency, except with each other.
Mm,
So I think those that struggle more, and everybody's struggle is different. So I have a hard time with that question saying struggle more. I'm like, more as to what? Because
well, that's fair.
somebody could look at me and be like, you got to move around the world and travel. Like,
Right.
amazing. That's so cool. And it was, but it also comes with other things, right? Like everything is a both and situation. And I did better when I started to hold things a lot looser,
Hmm.
as far as my expectations for myself, just trying to handle things as they came instead of like holding on to things too tightly.
Well, that's a great segue because the title of your book, Holding On and Letting Go. So, I mean, it's perfect segue here. So, obviously, you felt that what you had to offer here had a space in this community, whether veteran spouse community. Where does your book speak to exactly these types of things that you're talking about here? What was the core motivation, I guess, to start out with for writing it, and then who do you hope to address with that?
Sure. The core motivation for my book is really to hold the tension and to show it, as much as I could of this roller coaster ride that we had been on. Um, the good and the bad, the holding the grief and the goodness, the fact that they could both coexist and it was okay, that they were both there at the same time, right? Like I could love a country that I was living in and fully engage and immerse myself and still miss my family back home and wish that Christmas could just be the traditional thing I grew up with.
Right.
Um, Raising our kids in this third culture, essentially, of we're moving all the time. You're a culture within a culture. You're an expat kid, but you're also a military kid and you're on a mission. And there's certain things we can say when we're touring around. There's certain things we can't say. And
Sure.
how amazing is it that you're, 3 years old on my back seeing the Coliseum, and you're probably asleep for part of it. But
Right.
but also the fact that like I'm worried about your consistency, like we're allowed to have these multiple layers of thoughts, emotions, feelings. And then the other part of the book is really saying we have to move through them. What does it look like up the mountain, down the valley, and back up the next one? Because you're never done. It is a continual process. So I tried to write the book that I really needed as a spouse, to not have like the etiquette book or the how I'm checking the box and the 10 steps to get to here. We've become such a clickbait community where we think we can easily solve these things. And it takes a lot of work. It takes dedication, it takes building your relationships with your person, your people you surround yourself with, your location. And then it takes the sweet surrender of saying, I don't get to be here long. Um, so how do I do what I can here well? And then let go and do it again somewhere else. So it's really, really written for our community to hopefully someone will look within these pages and find they are not alone in these things they've struggled with,
Mm,
the good, the bad, and the ugly. I mean, there are very um, vulnerable topics about my husband and I in this book, and yet he's read every word and is like, yeah, I hope this helps someone else too. And that's our
great.
goal. If it just touches one person and helps them either say, okay, I feel seen, or maybe I do need to get help. Maybe what I'm feeling is a bit of anxiety, or I need some mental and emotional support that I don't have yet. Or, am I investing in a community and making the most of this time, whatever that means to me? Then I
Yeah.
think we'll have done our job.
That's great. And it's refreshing to hear because, something you said, which is an area of study that I'm passionate about, which is this concept of, I think one of the things that we struggle with most in our current human modern condition is the idea that we just have to get through X. Whatever X is, if we can just get through it, right? Whatever that is, whether it's a deployment, whether it's a child being bratty, because they do,
Yes.
I've got to get through that. And to hear someone say, well, no, 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 you have to embrace what that is and the process that you're in, because a lot of the books that are written today are kind of written with that target audience of here's how you get through X.
Yeah.
But it's not about getting through X, it's about being in that process, like you said. So the book is not out yet currently, is that correct? It comes out
Yeah.
some
Depending on when this airs, it comes out May 6th,
May 6th, okay.
2025. Yep.
Which will be about
And
a week, I think about a week after we publish this. So it'll be the
oh,
end of
great.
April, so it'll be about a week later.
Okay. Yes, but pre-orders are open now. We'll just say that to everybody. It's available on militaryfamilybooks.com and Amazon. Those are the two locations you can order it. Pre-orders greatly help authors, so we'll just plug that out there. But the advanced reader copies have gone out. The feedback has been very positive from those that have read it so far, and it's been the work of my heart for years. I mean, that's the other thing. I'm being very honest with our community is they're like, wow, how did you're a military spouse. How did you write a book? How did you do? I'm like, it took 7 years.
This
It
will
just
take
takes
time.
as long as it takes.
Yes, it does. Now, what is your current involvement? So your husband is out of the military now, correct?
No, not yet. At the
Oh, he's
time of
still in.
this,
Okay.
yep, he's still in. September 30th
30th,
of
that's right.
2025 will be his effective it's the EAS, right? End of
Yes,
active service
yes,
date.
yes. Okay.
So we're looking at all the retirement party planning right now. He
Sure.
wants to hold it before everybody PCS this summer, and so we're quickly chugging along to the finish line. So yes, my ID still says active duty spouse, but it's the last one I will have that says that. And I did have a moment. I mean, that's it too. We're holding space for this transition we're going through currently. I like weirdly, started crying folding green t-shirts the other day because I was like, such a relief that I won't have to fold these green t-shirts anymore. And yet at the same time, also like very weirdly sad to me to like not see him coming home in a uniform. Not
Sure.
that he is this uniform, but it's just going to be a big shift.
Yeah. Yeah. You're going to have to start phasing out a lot of the desert tan items from your wardrobe.
I think I'm going to get a lot more closet space, friend. I think this is
What do
my
you
hope.
what do you see going forward? What would you like to see, number one, happen with this book? I mean, you kind of spoke to that already, but also being involved in this community post retirement. Do you see I'm leaving this all behind and this book is kind of my signal of this is what I want to offer, but I'm done? Or do you see this as being a community that you would like to continue to be a part of? And if so, what capacity?
Yeah, it's interesting for you to ask that because my husband and I have been having like very intense conversations about this. And I said, I actually like going to Mill Spouse Fest this past year. I was like, this is the first time I've actually been able to go to some of these things, like these
Mhm.
great community events that are offered. I just feel like I either had little infants or I was overseas at like embassy stations where not a lot of that was offered. Um, and I don't want to say that's not a fair blanket statement across, okay?
Oh, that's fair.
Um, so I just feel like I'm actually more in a season where I can serve the community than I was when we were actually in, which is kind of crazy to think about that, but it's true. I feel like I have a different capacity now than I did when you're under and you're in it. Um, and I hope to continue to serve, especially in light of the fact I'm very passionate about storytelling. I am an editor now and love to help with other people's stories. I started a writing workshop that I run every so often online through Legacy Magazine called Work of Words, where I take participants through a 6-week writing course and just really let them in a very small group so it stays intimate. Where we work through their own stories that they want to tell, published or not, right? There is a really different feeling when you're offering your work to a reader to when you're just writing it maybe for a historical aspect for your family or a story you want to work through and keep. Um, I think I could see myself doing a lot of different workshops I'm hopeful for with journaling, writing, letting people really greet what they've gone through, because that's a lot of it too. Um, is is we've gone through a lot and we rarely had a chance to pause and process it. I mean, yeah, the service and the family member, where you're just kind of like, wow, we did all of that. I don't even know how we got here. Here we are.
You blinked and 20 years went by and suddenly you've got all this extensive list of things you accomplished. And yeah, you don't have time to sit down and go through it.
Yeah. So that's my hope is to continue to serve the community in various ways, right? And my hope for the book, I mean, it's interesting. We've kind of had that round table thought of like, what does success mean for this? And to me, it's not a metric. It's
Well,
a it's a movement. Did it move someone? Um, and maybe that's the artist in me, right? Like the former dancer in me
yeah,
that's like art to me reflects culture. And so if this got to reflect even a little bit of culture truthfully that we lived and then gets to affect someone else, I mean, that was what prompted me to write my own story were the 2 books I read about military life that I was like, yes, this is how I feel too. And
yeah.
someone said it for me, in a way that helped me share with others and say that this is how it feels. Um,
No, I think that the artistic in, the artist in you contributing to this is huge simply because the military is about 99% utilitarian based, right? It's just entirely utilitarian in its functionality. And so we need that. We need that balance. And because the healthy person needs that balance of the artistic side to speak to these things. And I think that that is something that has been lacking. I think you just offered a pretty good quote, but if I were to ask you, moving forward, you have one thing, a sentence or an elevator speech to offer a military spouse out there who's listening and maybe struggling with what am I doing? I'm treading water. I'm feel like I'm drowning. You have an elevator speech to offer them. What is it?
Goodness, I would say that you are living in the middle of beautiful tension. And tension is not a word we want to go towards. Discomfort is not a word. We're like biologically programmed to not do things that are uncomfortable for us,
Right.
right? Which is all of military life is being uncomfortable and feeling like, what am I doing here and why am I doing it? And I think if you can pause in every duty station and say, here's a really honest look at where I'm at. Here is the family I'm raising or not. Here are the goals I have or not. Here's the capacity I have. And what am I going to do with that? What is going to make me feel like my whole self here? Um, and when we think about that tension, it is living in it. It's like we said, it's sitting in it and saying, a guitar string, right, does not sound like what it should sound like without tension. So
Mm,
your life is not going to be what you would like it to be without that tension.
fair.
It's moving it towards constructive tension and pushing your own boundaries to say, I do have something to offer. I do have purpose. I can be part of this community, or I can be outside of it and support my service members still. There's a lot of different ways to live this life. And I think that it's important for us to grow awareness and how to support one another through it um, and hold on to our community, whatever that looks like. That can look like fellow spouses, they're pretty great to have around. That can also look like your civilian friends that you make wherever you're at. It can look like the job that you have. The one and last part of this elevator pitch is that I was the spouse before all the social media came along.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that it does good things. I have a lot of friends that I have made. I have my job. I have my book because of social media, okay? Because of this awesome online presence we have. But it's never going to replace your in person need for connection. So get
Absolutely.
out, find the people, make it work for while you're there. And I guess my last offering is that I love that term liminal space of that place between,
Mm.
but that liminal comes from Latin limens, which means threshold. So every time you're in the in between, you're on a threshold, you're on the precipice of something really good that you could step into. And that's what I would encourage them to think about.
I love it. That was beautifully put. And yeah, our fund, I firmly believe that we have a fundamental need for community, in-person community. And like you said, that, social media for all of it has brought some benefit, of course. And there are some things that we're able to do, stay connected with military people from around the world at a moment's
Yes.
notice, which is great. But it doesn't replace physical community. And I don't think that it ever will. And so I think that's sage advice. So again, I do have one, I have two final questions that
Okay.
are more of the fun nature. I always ask guests. Um, I usually talk to software engineers. You're a writer, though. You're a writer. So here's the question. When you're writing, what music, if any, do you listen to while you're
Oh,
writing?
for sure. That's a great question for me. I have a series of things that I listen to on Spotify. I have like several playlists that are like no words, just like peaceful journaling. I also really love the new Little Women soundtrack.
Okay.
I listen to that one constantly. There's like the first one that's about like Orchard House. Like I think the title of it is Orchard House, is
Yeah,
like
yeah.
my let's get writing one. Just a regular Joe March over here.
Love it. Love it.
Yeah.
And the final question, what was the last movie or show you watched that was like, yes, this was great?
Oh my, that's hard. Yeah, because I feel like I have several that I'm like, oh, how would I answer that? I will give you an old favorite. Okay. So
Okay.
maybe this is the movie I watched every time we move. And it's Julie and Julia, which is the story of Julia Child and this
Okay.
blogger, a real life blogger that like decided she'd go through all of her recipes in 1 year, to like shake up her life. And it's this juxtaposition between these two characters. I don't know. It has Meryl Streep in it, and I think it's Amy Adams, and it's a delight. It's just I love watching Julia Child's, the character stumbling around Paris and like not knowing what she's going to do,
Sure.
and she's a foreign service spouse and is trying to figure out her next big dream. And look at her, right? She goes and gets trained at the Cordon Bleu and creates this cookbook, and it gives me great hope to watch that movie. So,
That's
and delicious food. It always makes me like want to go make something, but really I just snack on stuff in my pantry.
Well, now I have to go see this movie. I have a 10-year-old who wants to be a chef. He's
There you
talked
go.
about being a chef since he was like 6 years old. So
Yeah.
sticking with it. And I now I have to see this movie. So, well, first let me say thank you for joining me, Lindsay. It's an absolute pleasure. The book is called Holding On and Letting Go. Again, that will be available May 6th. You said
Yep.
May 6th.
Yep.
Okay, so May 6th, release date for Holding On and Letting Go. Until that time, you can find more about this we'll be putting the link in the description of
Great.
this video and whatnot. So Lindsay, it was an absolute pleasure. Thank you for joining me. We're almost out of time. So any final thoughts at all?
I think not. I think we covered all of our bases today. Thank you so much for what you're doing for the community, and any way that we can continue to connect and inspire each other, I think is amazing. That question you asked me about, like, would we continue to be part of this community? Yes, because the
Right.
community is where the heartbeat is.
Yes,
So
absolutely. Very well put, and I couldn't have said it better myself. So on that note, thank you once again for joining me. And thanks to everyone. Again, this is an episode of Veteran Voices in Code. You can reach me at greg@codeplatoon.org at any time you want to learn about what Code Platoon does. Um, I'm here to answer your questions. So thank you once again, and you all have a great day.